I never needed the spotlight because I was the one who quietly adjusted it behind the scenes. For 12 years, I was the strategist no one talked about but everyone relied on. My name wasn't on the press releases, but my fingerprints were on every deal that saved the company from bleeding out. I didn't lead with noise, I led with precision. I'm Veronica Lane, 38, Director of Strategic Development at Ascendrix Tech. Or at least, I don't do office gossip or birthday cupcakes. I don't care who wore what or whose kid made honor roll. What I care about is systems that work, numbers that tell the truth, and strategies that don't fall apart the moment someone with a buzzword addiction touches them. I helped turn Ascendrix from a scrappy startup into a real player in the enterprise space. I built forecasting models when the C-suite barely understood predictive analytics. I kept us 2 steps ahead when our competitors were still asking what pivot meant. People came and went. Founders cashed out. Middle management got younger and louder. I stayed. I adapted. Marcus, our former CEO, trusted me, never micromanaged, never second-guessed. When he retired 6 months ago, and they brought in a new guy from the East Coast with shiny suits and shinier slogans, I didn't flinch. I'd seen transitions before. Most didn't matter. I thought this one wouldn't either, so I kept my head down, focused on what I do best, building strategies that hold under pressure. I still arrived before sunrise. I still left after dark. I still reviewed every quarterly plan like it was a chessboard no one else could see. That Monday morning, I walked into the strategy meeting like I always did, coffee in hand, mind already running 5 steps ahead. And then I saw him, the stranger in the tailored suit, standing beside our VP of operations, smiling like he'd already been here for years. He stepped forward, extended a hand. "You must be Veronica. I've heard a lot about you." I smiled back. Polite. Professional, but something in me shifted, because the way he said it didn't sound like admiration. It sounded like a warning. Something about him didn't sit right. Maxwell Crane, that was his name, the new operations support lead. Whatever that meant. A vague title with a polished business card and too many LinkedIn endorsements. He shook hands with everyone like a politician, firm grip. Direct eye contact, name repetition. I watched him work the room like he'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. When he got to me, his eyes lingered just half a second too long. "I've heard you basically run this place," he said, smiling. "Can't wait to learn from the best." Flattering. Too flattering. I've been in enough boardrooms to know the difference between genuine respect and strategic charm. Max was charming, disarmingly so, but it felt scripted, measured. Over the next few days, things began to shift in ways I couldn't fully explain, at least not at first. I wasn't looped into the usual prep calls for our quarterly review. My name was absent from 2 cross-departmental meetings I would normally lead. Files I'd created were suddenly being reorganized by a shared drive I never approved. When I brought it up to admin, they brushed it off as an update from the new CTO. I caught Max sitting in on meetings that had nothing to do with operations, just listening, taking notes, occasionally asking oddly specific questions about internal workflows, questions only someone being coached would even think to ask. Still, I told myself it was fine. Maybe they were fast-tracking his integration. Maybe they wanted him to understand the bigger picture. Maybe I was being territorial. But then came the reassignments. Projects I had spearheaded, initiatives I'd nurtured from concept to near execution were suddenly on hold or reevaluated. The new pipeline chart had Max's name listed as strategic advisor on 2 of them. When I asked my supervisor why, she offered me a look that landed somewhere between sympathy and discomfort. "Just temporary," she said. "Just while things settle." Settle from what? I hadn't lost a single metric in over a year. My strategies had outperformed projections 3 quarters in a row. There was nothing to settle, and yet I was being quietly displaced. No demotion, no confrontation, just this creeping, silent evaporation of relevance. I started paying attention. Closely, not out of fear, out of instinct. Because when people start moving quietly around you, it usually means they're building something. Or worse, they're tearing something down. The official meeting was scheduled for 9:00 Mama. But the calendar invite had been updated at 7:43, only I hadn't seen it. I walked into conference room D with my usual black coffee and backup notepad, only to find it empty. No chairs arranged, no projectors humming, just silence. At first, I thought I had the room wrong. I checked my calendar again. That's when I noticed the new invite. The subject line scrubbed of specifics. Strategic restructuring discussion, confidential. I wasn't on the list. Neither was anyone from my team. An hour later, I was called into HR. Carmen, the director of people operations, sat with a printed packet and a forced smile. Legal language spilled across the top sheet: non-disclosure, non-compete, mutually agreed departure, a severance offer, clean, polished, prepared days in advance. I didn't cry. I didn't protest. I didn't ask why, because I already knew. It wasn't performance-related. It wasn't budget cuts. It was execution. I had been removed. Efficiently, surgically, strategically. The new CEO, Evan Whitmore, didn't bother showing up. Instead, Carmen read a short statement on his behalf about fresh perspectives, new direction, and respect for my contributions. I could almost hear the comms team typing it out with glazed eyes and tight deadlines. Max wasn't mentioned. He didn't have to be. I was being erased, and he was already filling the space I left behind. They expected a reaction. Shock, anger, maybe a tear or two, but I gave them nothing. Just a nod, a thank you, and a quiet request to pack up my office by day's end. I walked back to my desk slowly, not because I was sad, because I was scanning. I noted who looked up, who didn't, who made awkward eye contact, who suddenly buried themselves in keyboards and spreadsheets. I saw the guilt in some faces, and I saw something worse in others. Relief? I gathered my things: laptop, notebooks, the framed photo of my dog, Cooper. I left behind the branded mug they gave me on my 10-year anniversary. Before I logged out for the last time, I did one final thing. I downloaded everything. Not illegally, not maliciously, just thoroughly. Performance reports, strategy decks, email threads, revision history, anything with my name on it. I didn't know exactly what I'd do with it. Not yet, but I wasn't walking away empty-handed. And I sure as hell wasn't walking away blind. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove to a small coffee shop 3 blocks from the office, the kind with bad lighting, strong Wi-Fi, and no one who knew my name. I opened my laptop, connected to a VPN, and started combing through the files I'd quietly pulled from the company's shared drives. I wasn't looking for revenge. Not yet. I was looking for a pattern, and it didn't take long to find one. Max had touched nearly every document I'd created over the past 3 months. Not just commented, edited, reorganized, renamed. Some slides had been duplicated and tweaked just enough to make it look like his input. Others had my name quietly scrubbed from version histories. Whole strategies I had drafted were now labeled under collaborative folders, where Max had the final timestamp. It wasn't just a handover. It was a rewrite, and he hadn't done it alone. There were email threads CC'd to leadership, selectively excluding me. Calendar invites moved last minute. Meeting notes revised after the fact, with quotes attributed to the new team lead. In one thread, someone even referred to Max as the next Veronica. Cute. I wasn't just being replaced. I was being rewritten out of the company's memory. That's when the anger started to bloom. Not loud, not hot, cold, focused. Because here's the thing. I wasn't some irreplaceable genius. I never pretended to be. But I was thorough, and I knew the systems better than anyone because I built most of them myself. And like any good architect, I left behind pressure points, toggles, loopholes, quiet little flaws I could exploit if I ever needed to. Back then, I never thought I would, but as I sat there with my fingers hovering over the keyboard, I realized something. They'd taken everything I'd built and assumed I'd disappear quietly. What they didn't know was that I kept copies of every strategy variant, especially the ones I didn't present. The riskier models, the shelved scenarios, the nuclear options. I had timelines, performance projections, and embedded assumptions only I could fully interpret. Without context, those models could collapse the entire Q3 roadmap. I didn't do anything that day, not directly, but I backed everything up to a private drive. I labeled the folder, in case they forgot, and for the first time in 12 years, I let myself feel something I had always kept buried beneath professionalism and strategy decks. I wanted them to pay. The truth came quietly, like most dangerous things do. It started with a name I almost missed, buried in the metadata of a quarterly roadmap slide I had created 6 weeks ago. The file had been modified by Max, but the original draft, deep in the document's history, showed something else. A comment tag left by a user with initials I didn't recognize. Ease. Of you, Evan Whitmore, the new CEO. That didn't make sense. At the time the file was created, Evan hadn't officially started. He was still consulting externally, as the board put it. But there he was editing internal strategy documents through Max's account. Either someone gave him access early, or Max had been working under him long before anyone admitted it. I started digging deeper. Through Slack logs, meeting transcripts, calendar overlaps. Quiet patterns started emerging. Private lunches, late-night Zoom calls, strategy syncs with no agendas. Max and Evan weren't just aligned, they were coordinated. And I wasn't the first target. 3 months before my termination, a senior engineer, Derek Chu, had been let go under suspiciously vague circumstances. No complaints, no warnings, just gone. A few weeks later, his project was repackaged under a new name, and Max was listed as a key contributor. Same thing with Maya, our financial analyst. She had raised concerns about budget discrepancies in a product rollout, and within 2 weeks, she'd resigned for personal reasons. But the replacement budget, the one I'd been told came from legal, bore Max's edits too. A pattern was forming. Quiet removals, strategic silencing, and behind it all, Max playing the loyal learner in public, and something else entirely in private. Then I found the deck. It was tucked inside a hidden folder on a shared drive only accessible to C-suite leadership. I shouldn't have had access, but someone had copied the folder into an archived backup 3 months ago, and someone, probably Max, forgot to scrub the inheritance permissions. The file was titled Phase 2, Strategic Streamlining Proposal. It read like a hit list. My name, Derek's, Maya's, 3 others from product, Upsona, and data. Beside each name, a summary of legacy dependencies, communication liabilities, and integration barriers. In other words, reasons we were inconvenient. Under Max's name, future-facing operations alignment. Under mine, limited cross-function flexibility, strategic overlap, resistance to adaptive modeling. They weren't even subtle about it. I remember just staring at the screen, not shocked, not even angry this time, just resolved. They didn't just want to replace me. They wanted to erase me cleanly, efficiently, and with enough plausible deniability to walk away smiling. And the worst part, it almost worked. If I hadn't caught that one trace of metadata, if I hadn't known my own files well enough to sense when something was off, I would have gone quietly, with a thank you email and a recycled LinkedIn post about new beginnings. But now I knew. They'd conspired. They'd coordinated. They'd made one mistake. They underestimated the one person who had always known how the machine worked because she was the one who built it. And now, I wasn't going to break the machine. I was going to turn it against them. I didn't go on the offensive right away. You don't throw a punch without knowing who's watching. Instead, I ran a small test just to see who was paying attention. I forwarded one of my old reports heavily redacted to a generic company inbox I knew Max still monitored. The subject line read, Legacy Forecasting Model, Possible Gaps. I included just enough real insight to make it credible, along with a couple of outdated assumptions that only I would know were no longer accurate. The bait was simple. If Max truly understood the model, he'd spot the flaws. If he didn't, he'd take it at face value and react. 2 hours later, someone from legal pinged my personal email. Hi, Veronica. Just a reminder that distribution of internal materials post-departure may be in violation of the terms in your exit agreement. I smiled. It wasn't even subtle. They were watching. Max didn't respond directly. But within 24 hours, I received a second message, this time from a private number. No name, just a text. Let it go. You've moved on. So have we. Clever. Threatening without sounding like a threat. Civil on the surface, hollow underneath, but it confirmed what I needed to know. They were nervous. And nervous people make mistakes. I started getting calls from unknown numbers. Silent voicemails. A former colleague I hadn't spoken to in months reached out. Just checking in. Another told me Max had been asking around about me, wondering who I still talked to. Whether I was planning anything. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Pressure. And yet, at no point did anyone make a direct accusation, because they couldn't. I hadn't broken any rules. I hadn't gone public. I hadn't even replied to legal. I was a ghost in their system. Still, I needed more than just metadata and suspicion. I needed proof. Proof that what they'd done wasn't just shady, it was coordinated. And possibly illegal. So I started digging into old access logs. I had admin-level visibility on several shared drives before I left enough to trace file movements, user edits, and login histories, with a bit of scripting and a very useful friend in IT compliance who owed me a favor. I pieced together a trail. Max had used Evan's credentials to access my private folders 2 weeks before I was let go. That was breach number 1. Then came breach number 2. Multiple internal strategy drafts, written under my name, had been modified post-termination and presented as part of an investor pitch, pitched under Max's signature. They were using my work to raise funding. Work I hadn't approved, hadn't signed off on, and had intentionally flagged as in progress. That's when I realized this wasn't just a personal takedown. This was intellectual property fraud. I documented everything: screenshots, file histories, internal timestamps, a timeline of who accessed what, when, and from where. I packaged it into a report clean, indexed, and professionally worded. And then I sat with it for 3 days, because here's the part no one tells you. When you know you're holding a bomb, even if it's righteous, it still shakes your hand a little. But I didn't hesitate because of fear. I hesitated because I wanted to make sure the timing was perfect. They thought I was an overachiever obsessed with deadlines. They were right. I just didn't tell them whose deadline I was working toward. I thought I knew what I was dealing with. Arrogance. Power games. A couple of C-suite egos cleaning house and rewarding loyalty with opportunity. But the deeper I went, the more I realized I'd only seen the surface. The first break came from an unlikely source. Jody Feldman, former director of HR. She messaged me on LinkedIn one night with a single line. They tried to do it to me too. We hadn't spoken in over a year. She'd resigned to spend more time with family, or at least that was the party line. But what she shared in the days that followed changed everything. Jody had been quietly pushed out the quarter before me after she raised concerns about internal promotions being approved without proper vetting. Her emails were ignored. Her access was cut early. Sound familiar? But Jody had kept copies files. Messages, screenshots. She'd seen Max's name in internal recommendation memos weeks before he was even hired. She showed me one with Evan's initials and a note. To begin shadow integration next month. Use Veronica as cover. Use me. It wasn't just strategic replacement. It was a calculated infiltration, a slow, silent reshuffling of key personnel across departments. All under the guise of agile transformation. The messaging was slick. The optics, professional. But the intent was clear. Consolidate power. Remove dissent. Monetize results. And then I found the money trail. Or rather, Jody did. In a folder from her archived compliance audit, she uncovered internal invoices tied to a consulting firm called Blue Cascade Group. On the surface, it looked legit executive coaching, operational audits, leadership alignment workshops. Except it wasn't a real firm. Its registered address traced back to a residential condo in Jersey City. Its founder, a shell identity linked to an associate of Evans from his previous startup, a startup that had collapsed in a fraud investigation 2 years prior. Suddenly, this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about a system. A system designed to cycle out institutional memory, reroute credit, and extract short-term value right before a big funding round or acquisition. Max wasn't just a golden boy. He was a plant. A surgical tool, the smiling scalpel. And I had been his test subject. The worst part, it was working. The company was prepping for Series D funding. Rumors of a pre-IPO roadmap were circulating. Max had been giving talks at conferences, parading my models tweaked just enough to claim as his own. Their momentum was building. So I built my own, using everything I'd gathered: Jody's files, my logs, strategy documents, emails, and the fake consultancy's incorporation records. I constructed a parallel timeline. Every edit, every suspicious transaction, every manipulated attribution, labeled, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. It wasn't just a revenge file anymore. It was a case, but I needed validation. Someone outside the system, someone whose name couldn't be dismissed as bitter ex-employee. That's when I contacted Maya, the financial analyst they pushed out 6 months before me. She'd gone quiet after her exit, disappeared from every platform. But I remembered something she'd said once in a meeting, after catching a senior exec inflating numbers. The truth always has a paper trail. You just have to know what part they didn't bother shredding. It took a few days to find her. She was freelancing quietly, doing forensic audits for nonprofits. I sent a vague message. If someone repackaged your work, sold it, and erased you in the process, would you want proof? Her response came an hour later. Where do we start? That night, we opened a shared drive called Backchannel. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel until then. I wasn't alone, and if they thought I was dangerous by myself, they had no idea what was coming next. I've always believed in leverage. Not noise, not drama, just quiet. Undeniable leverage, the kind that makes people stop breathing for half a second when they realize what you know, and what you're willing to do with it. So I didn't go public. Not yet. Instead, I treated it like what it was, a strategy rollout. Except this time, the client was me, and the target wasn't a market segment. It was a network of manipulators who thought they'd covered every exit. They hadn't. First, I split our file into 3 versions. Version A was the full case, every document, every connection, every timestamp. It was built like a prosecutorial brief. Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, manipulation of internal metrics, and unethical attribution of proprietary strategy. That one went into a sealed drive. Password protected, printed once, locked in a box, just in case. Version B was cleaner, stripped of legal accusation, focused solely on ethical breaches and operational risks. It read like an internal audit, something a cautious board member could read without breaking into a sweat. That one had an audience in mind. The board of directors. Version C was a surgical PR grenade. A story, not emotional, not dramatic, just true, about how a rising tech company had quietly ousted experienced leadership, plagiarized core IP, funneled contracts through shell entities, and polished it all under the glow of innovation. That version was designed for a journalist I trusted, one with teeth. Then I mapped timing. The company was 2 weeks away from its Series D funding announcement. Investors were circling. Articles were being ghostwritten. Max was scheduled to speak at a fintech conference in San Francisco, his biggest public platform yet. Perfect. I reached out to the board through an encrypted contact form Jody had helped me find. No names, no drama, just a single line and an attachment. Before you go all in, you should see how the house was built. Version B, time-stamped and clean. A day later, I got the read receipt. 2 days after that, Maya forwarded me a background check request from a third-party audit firm one she hadn't applied to, but that had access to her financial analysis from her time at Ascendrix. It was subtle, but clear. They were fact-checking. Meanwhile, version C was in motion. I sent it through a burner email to my contact at Tech Ledger, a digital publication with a reputation for exposing internal corruption in the Valley. I didn't include my name. I didn't need to. The documentation spoke loud enough. And then came the most important move. I scheduled an email to send to Max personally, not to accuse, not to threaten, just to remind. Attached, a single PowerPoint slide, one of mine, the real one, the one he had repackaged, edited, and claimed as his own, except this version had my name embedded deep in the metadata time-stamped. Signed, and with a tracked revision log that ended 6 weeks before he touched it. The subject line read, "You forgot to delete the original." I never expected him to reply, and he didn't. But the next day, his LinkedIn activity froze. His scheduled conference appearance was pulled due to illness, and word started trickling in through back channels. Ascendrix had postponed their funding announcement indefinitely. It wasn't over yet, but the walls had cracked, and all I had done so far was knock. They say revenge is best served cold. I disagree. The best kind of revenge is served precisely when the timing hurts the most, and there's no one left to spin the story in time. That moment came on a Tuesday. Max had gone quiet. His name was no longer showing up in company press briefings, and Ascendrix's blog, which had been pushing out leadership spotlights weekly, hadn't published anything in 10 days. The delay in the Series D funding round had started whispers first in niche industry Slack channels, then in venture Twitter, and then came the Tech Ledger article. It dropped at 9:00 a.m. sharp. The Ghost Architect. How one tech giant built success on stolen work and strategic silencing. No names. Not at first. But the breadcrumbs were obvious for anyone paying attention. It laid out the pattern. Sudden exits of senior staff. Suspicious rebranding of internal strategies. Inflated performance claims tied to one executive who'd only been at the company for 6 months. Then came the receipts. Slides, emails, file logs. Everything carefully redacted enough to preserve legality, but detailed enough to terrify anyone in the room. By 10:15. The article had been picked up by 2 aggregators. By noon, I got a message from Maya. Investor group just froze their contribution. I know the guy. He's spooked. By 2:00 p. Ascendrix's internal systems had gone into lockdown. Source: Jody. Apparently, legal had launched a full audit. Not because they wanted to, but because the board had demanded it. And then the fallout started. An internal memo from Evan leaked by nightfall. PR speak wrapped around panic. Integrity. Clarification. Isolated incidents. But no one was buying it. Not with that much smoke. I didn't even have to push anymore. The dominoes were falling all on their own. The final move came from someone I didn't expect. Derek Chu, the senior engineer they pushed out before me. He reached out after reading the article, asking if I still had access to his original infrastructure analysis, the one Max had buried and rewritten. I did, and I sent it. The next day, Derek published his own piece on Medium. When credit disappears, why I left Ascendrix. Now the story had a face, a second voice, and it wasn't just about me anymore. It was a pattern. By Friday, Max's company bio had been scrubbed from the team page. His name disappeared from their Series D decks. His Twitter went private. A recruiter friend of mine said he was taking a break to explore consulting. Evan, silent, completely, but silence. At that level, isn't absence? It's strategy. It means lawyers. And I was ready. I forwarded version A of the file, the full case, to a partner contact I had at a regulatory firm. Just a quiet FYI, no ask, no pressure. Because I wasn't trying to sue anyone. I was trying to make sure that if anyone ever did, they'd have everything they needed. I didn't walk away with a title. I didn't get a press quote. I didn't want one. What I got was something better. Control. They tried to erase me, but I made sure every move they made afterward was traced in ink I left behind. It didn't explode. It unraveled. Over the next 2 weeks, the story evolved from a leak to a full-blown investigation. Ascendrix issued an internal statement about conducting an independent review. A third-party law firm was brought in. Employees were interviewed. Audit trails were dissected. And then quietly, without a press release, Evan Whitmore resigned. No farewell email. No official statement. Just gone. His office emptied overnight. His name scrubbed from internal systems by sunrise. The only clue, a line buried in a board memo. Effective immediately. Leadership transition will be handled by the existing executive committee. Translation. We're not saving him. Max lasted 3 more days. He issued a carefully worded LinkedIn post about taking time to reflect and new opportunities on the horizon. Comments were disabled. His photo vanished from conference rosters. Job listings that once bragged about his leadership disappeared or were reworded. Internally, they called it course correction. Externally, investors called it damage control. And the board? They did what boards always do when the money's at risk. They cleaned house, repositioned, and promised cultural realignment. But what mattered most to me came in the form of an encrypted message from Jody. We made it impossible for them to pretend it didn't happen. That was the win. Not just the resignations, not just the fallout, but the fact that they didn't get to rewrite the ending. I did. I kept their names out of the press because I didn't need revenge by humiliation. I needed accountability. I needed truth. I needed them to know deep down that the person they thought would go quietly, the person they dismissed as non-adaptive, had pulled the floor out from beneath them, and she did it without raising her voice. They built a story without me. I rewrote the final chapter without them. It came in the form of a calendar invite. No subject, no context. Just a meeting from an Ascendrix board member I'd only met twice in my 12 years there, Elizabeth Hargrove. Sharp. Private. The kind of executive who never wasted words. I almost didn't accept it. Curiosity won. We met at a discreet private office. Nowhere near company headquarters. No assistants. No lawyers. Just her. A tablet. And a perfectly poured cup of green tea already waiting for me. I'll be blunt, she said. We'd like to bring you back. I said nothing. Just let her keep going. She laid it out clearly. The board wanted a full internal rebuild. Transparency. Structural audit. A complete reset of strategic operations, and they wanted me to lead it. Not just in name. With actual authority. I would report directly to the board. Bypass the executive suite entirely. Total independence. Total control. They even offered me a new title. Chief Recovery Officer. It sounded like something born from crisis. Which, of course, it was, but titles never interested me. I asked her one question. Why me? She looked at me without blinking. Because you knew where the cracks were before anyone else even knew they existed. And because you're the only one who didn't flinch when everything collapsed. She slid the proposal across the table. Salary. Benefits. A discretionary bonus structure tied to internal reform milestones. A blank check with strings attached only to impact. It was tempting, but I didn't pick it up. Not yet, because after everything they'd done after the silence. The gaslighting, the quiet erasure, I wasn't sure I wanted a seat at their table anymore. Maybe I'd rather build a better one, somewhere else. Or maybe I'd take the seat, but only if I got to burn the table first. I gave myself 48 hours. Not because I needed time to weigh pros and cons, I'd already done that in the car ride home, but because I needed silence. Room to hear my own voice again after months of being overwritten, underestimated, and pushed to the edge of erasure. I turned off my phone, took long walks with Cooper, made coffee the slow way, reread old notebooks, sketches of ideas I'd shelved for years while building things for other people. And I asked myself the only question that mattered. Was I going back because I wanted to, or because I finally had the leverage? There's something intoxicating about being wanted by the people who once discarded you. The apology dressed as opportunity. The power shift that suddenly makes them deferential, polite, generous, but that wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want their apology. I wanted autonomy, clarity, space to build without looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next restructure. And yet, there was something in the offer that whispered possibility. What if I could rebuild the system from the inside? What if I could create policies that protected the next Maya, the next Derek, the next me? What if the table wasn't just theirs to burn? What if it was mine to redesign? So I sent Elizabeth a message. Not a yes, not a no, just terms. I'll consider the role under 3 conditions: full audit access, unfiltered reporting rights to the board, and the ability to hire and fire independent of legacy leadership. She replied within the hour, accepted. Your table, your rules. I didn't smile. Not exactly. But something in my chest settled. I wasn't going back to reclaim what was mine. I was going back to build something that couldn't be stolen again. And I'd do it without the noise. Without revenge. Just one clear message to anyone watching. Erase me once, shame on you. Try again, and I'll rewrite the system itself. 6 months later, Ascendrix doesn't look the same. The glossy veneer is still there, sleek branding, high-rise office, polished investor decks, but beneath it, everything's different. The executive layer has been thinned. Department heads now submit strategies that are vetted once for performance and once for ethics. Anonymous reporting actually means something now. And me? I sit in the corner office I never asked for. Because I chose it. I lead recovery meetings with ex-colleagues who once looked through me in elevators. Not out of spite, out of necessity. They now know the cost of silence, of complicity. And maybe that's enough. Jody came back part-time. Maya consults on financial compliance. Derek's old infrastructure model. We reinstated it. It's better than anything Max ever copied. Funny how the people they tried to erase turned out to be the very foundation the company needed to survive. Sometimes, I walk past the framed photos in the lobby, photos of leadership past and present. Evan's face is gone. Max never made it to the wall. And mine, I told them not to bother, because legacy isn't built in glass frames. It's built in what stays standing when the wind stops. At the end of each week, I write one sentence in a private notebook. Just one. A reflection. A reminder. Something no press release will ever quote. Last Friday, I wrote, "Quiet doesn't mean powerless." It never did. I close the notebook, turn off the lights, walk out without ceremony. No speeches, no vindication arc, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the system they thought they owned now answers to me. And if anyone asks how I got here, how I survived it, I'll tell them the truth. They built the stage. I just rewrote the script.